Welcome to the Shameless Podcast, where I help Christian men kill shame, stand strong, and live on mission. I'm your host, Ken Freire, and I'm bringing you real stories, practical insights, and biblical truths that equip you to break free from your sin, shame, and live a life of purpose. Let's step out of the shadows together and into the light of Christ. Welcome back to another episode. Today, I have with me the owner of Renewed Hope Coaching, where he specifically works with married Christian men who struggle with pornography. My special guest today is Bryan Petkau. Bryan, I'm super excited to have you. We have been connecting, texting, emailing each other, and building really this relationship because I think you and I have very kindred spirits. And we're going to get into this. And today's topic of what we're talking about is the limits of therapy in addiction recovery. So you used to do a lot of professional counseling. You've moved into the coaching world. But before we go too deep into that, Bryan, I want people to get to know you a little bit. And I just really want them to know, what's it like to be a Canadian?
Yeah. I love the question. What's it like to be a Canadian? Everyone's expecting me to say cold, brother, cold. But actually, I'm a West, close to Vancouver. It's really nice here, like weather-wise and things. But yeah, you know what? Right now, I think a lot of us are looking at you guys right now today, as we record this is Inauguration Day, and with a bit of jealousy, to be honest with you. We're over here in Canada with literally no leadership at all. Like our leader has recently retired and there's nobody running this place. And so what's like being a Canadian right now is really a lot of kind of frustration and uncertainty, So that's kind of where it feels now is we're looking to you guys going like, oh my goodness, look at this and look at what's going to, everything feels very hopeful. Again, that's just the information that we're getting kind of on this side, and we're praying and hoping for some similar things over here. That's kind of how it feels to be a Canadian right now.
I know, man. I've talked to several Canadians who are like, we have no leader. And I'm like, wow, that's weird. And I guess the legislation like you have to wait till March or something like that before you can
I'm not a pro on the whole thing, but apparently the prime minister, he knew he was toast. And there was an election, I think next one's October. So still quite a ways away, like 10 months. And so he decides to resign and then essentially freezes our government and leadership until their party can figure out a new leader or whatever. Meanwhile, all the Canadians in this country are sitting here going like, what are we doing? Meanwhile, we have Donald Trump on your side coming in, and we need to be communicating and talking and working with and all these kinds of things. And there's a bit of a strange time to be a Canadian right now. Yeah.
Well, the topic today is not about the politics of Canada and America, but that is going to get very interesting, I would say, in the next year or two. Let's talk about this conversation about like the limits of therapy. Before we jump into that, Bryan, give us a little bit of your story. How did you get to this place where you started to realize there is this limit to therapy?
Yeah. So for me, the quick Coles notes, pornography was a struggle that I had, for more than 2 decades.
Yeah.
And was coming in, it was interfering with all sorts of relationships. I was with the woman of my dreams and things were not going well. And for me, I was about to lose her, and that was, hey, I need to find somebody to help me with this because I've tried on my own. And so found actually a therapist who specialized in this area. Very difficult to do that. And just God knew what he was doing. And so I end up in his office, and I wish I could say that the clouds parted and it was a straight line, but I had to so while that was a very good experience, I also had to put a bunch of stuff together kind of myself, as I was kind of in group stuff and those kinds I need to be connected with others and those kinds of things. And it kind of wasn't being provided for there. I found I found some really good freedom. Krista and I got married, that's a whole nother story, praise God. And felt called to become a helper. And so my first inclination was, I'm going to become a therapist and I'm going to follow this path. We feel like the Lord is calling us that way. So hit university, start to study psychology. It took me 9 years, finished my master's degree, specific training around sexual addictions, those kinds of things. And I opened a therapy practice of my own. Very excited to do this kind of work. And as word got out about what I specialized in my practice, quickly full with a wait list around the corner. The need, as you know, is huge. And so start working with men. And I do that in my practice for 5 years. hundreds and hundreds of men through my office, and really started to open my eyes to the fact that I don't think, just as I was experiencing myself as a client, like I don't think this is the best model. I think we can do better than this, than the finish a 50-minute session and like, okay, John, like we'll see you next week, have a great week, brother. That's a lot of week with no support kind of in between these 50-minute
Yeah.
sessions kind of in the therapy world.
That's where a lot of guys would start to fall, right? It's like
Yeah.
they might have a great day after that, but it's the evenings or the morning. Like there's a lot of week there.
Yeah. So it's like, what is that? 6 days, 23 hours and 10 minutes with no support right out of the week. And it's like, okay. So, and then sometimes I'd see a man, at his next appointment. I'd be like, brother, how was the week? I got in the muck a few days after I saw you. And I'm like, darn, like I wish we could have talked right before now. So start to realize, I think that we can do better than that. So that's really when it was starting to hit home for me, is like, and I don't know, maybe we'll talk about that in a little while, but for me, I knew there was something we could do better. So I started to take a step away from the therapy world and started to ask that question. It was like, okay, at that point I've been doing therapy for 5 years in my private practice, hundreds of men through my office. And, stepping back and thinking to myself, well, okay, if I was going to put something together based on this last 14-year journey, 9 years of university, 5 years working with men, that, something together that I think would be really good for guys and not be constrained by all this stuff. Like, what would that look like? And so that's kind of that's where I am now in the coaching space, because it just frees up. There's a freedom there. I can do the things that are required for the results that we're trying to get, versus trying to work within this framework, because ethically and all these kinds of, like, you want to keep your license, you better play by the rules. Like, you can't check in with your clients, like all those kinds of things, kind of goes by the wayside. And so there's been this freedom to do what we need to do to get the results that we need to get. And it's been a real blessing.
Yeah. So besides the not having the ability to check in, right? Because that seems like that was the biggest roadblock or the biggest limitation to therapy. What was another one that you found you were like, oh my gosh, this is just stifling the growth of helping people?
Yeah. So I think that, and that's the model that we run, not only one-on-one therapy sessions. So as I alluded to, the 50-minute here and there, I think that it's important to have community, is really important too. So to be able to offer, we run groups, guys have access to all sorts of different groups each week. They just pick times that work for them based on their busy schedules and come in. So we have that, and we have like a private WhatsApp community, and those kinds for in the moment support. So the guys are always plugged in with each other in this community. And I think, in the therapy world, that would be something you absolutely could not do, because now we're
Yeah.
talking about sharing information about like all these kinds of roadblocks and red tape, if I want to put it that way, that are kind of in front of you. So those are some other things. And, providing someone with a real plan and being able to tailor it to them and having this community and those kinds of things is just stuff you can't do there. So I think
Yeah.
like number two on that, yeah, definitely community and
Yeah.
other men.
Let's walk community a little bit, because I can see myself as a new guy if I'm struggling. Right now, you threw me into this community, and I know that they're all struggling because we all are paying to hang out with Bryan and get help with Bryan. How have you witnessed the community bond together, or maybe challenges that they may have in trying to connect?
Yeah. So it's been such a, like, God is so good. So we launched this program about 3 years ago, and, the question in my mind was, okay, like, here's, put this thing together. I think this is going to crush. I think it's going to do so well for men. There's only one way to find out. Let's bring some guys in and let's do this. And so then witnessing what he's done in this, like literally today in our WhatsApp community, there are guys, like literally right now as we speak, there are guys who were struggling earlier and they've reached out and they've received this other support from all these other men, lifting them up, bringing them up. And then they've checked in a little later in the day and gone, you guys, thank you so much for your prayers and just for having somewhere to come here and be plugged into. I'm feeling way better now and I'm on the path. And without relapsing today and without falling back into that stuff. When I first opened the community, like I wasn't sure. I'm like, because there's a lot of, as there's a lot of shame and things like this that comes with that. And, as we onboard men coming in, we have that kind of conversation. It's like, listen, I know that there's going to be some resistance, even as there probably was reaching out in the first place, naturally. There's going to be some resistance coming into the community. And I just want to normalize that for you. And I want you to remember that every single man who's here had that first day in here, and as you come in, you're going to see these guys with these wonderful results. because we run, our program is 6 months, but there's like a continuation thing where guys can stay. So we've had some men with us for a couple of years now, and they're doing great. We're celebrating 750 days clear from all this stuff or whatever. Brother, you're going to be maybe on day 1 or 2 when you come in here. And just remember, doesn't matter what or where they are, they all started with a 1 or a 2. You know what I mean? They were all at the beginning of that journey at some point. And so coming in, just reminding them that and encouraging them, and the guys are wonderful because I think a lot of them remember too. I remember the first time I came in, right? And, so it's just been watching God work in this has been just such a blessing. I don't know how else to put it. Like these men coming together, like, time after time in these communities, guys struggling and just being brought up by this. We use a war analogy a lot, by their platoon, this platoon of men, that their journey is just, yeah. I hope that answers the question. Sorry, Ken.
No, that's great, man. And I love that you just bring it up. You preempt their concerns or their worry. You're like, hey, you're going to feel like this. I love it. You're like, every guy here has had this same day. So as you are working with men, when they come to you, what have you found to be the predominant themes in their lives that they're struggling with and they're saying, hey, I need your help, Bryan?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I can say like, the story somewhere or another, most of the time, it's tough to paint with a general brush, looks like, I was exposed to this as an early age. I've been struggling, for decades. Didn't really think when I was young even about it much, just, was a thing. And then end up with my wife, end up married, thinking that, once I'm married, and here's some guys oftentimes think this, once I'm married, this will be fine because I'll have my wife and this stuff. But it's a tactic of the enemy. It's just not the truth. And then, so we're married for a while. Maybe things are okay for a bit. And then eventually I fall back into it. And eventually there's a discovery of some kind. She finds out. I promise her, hey, dear, yeah, like this stuff has been going on, and I'm going to do something about this. And then maybe again, some traction, but then eventually kind of end up back there again. And then in many cases, multiple times, this cycle repeats. I'm discovered by my wife. And eventually it's, listen, you need to get this, you need to take this seriously or else we're in some trouble. We might be done. And then that's when they reach out and they're ready to get some help with the program like this. So those are the themes. And what I would love for men to hear about that even deeper. And so there's kind of the timeline theme ish, but somewhere along the line, they've learned that pornography, in a strange way serves some kind of purpose for them. And maybe they haven't learned and actually that's been on their radar much until we start to uncover that stuff. But you think of being a teenager and all of those difficult pieces. I'm in school. Maybe I'm not the popular one. Maybe I am. I don't know, whatever those things are and how hard it is just to grow up. Well, I know when I go home to some degree or another, for me, it was magazines, because I'm a little bit older guy. For the younger guys, the internet's been there. I know when I go home, there's this comfort waiting for me, and it never says no. And it's kind of always there. Like in some way it's serving these purposes as I grow and, think about beyond a teen, you're a young man, married life, I'm expected to work, and all of those societal expectations, sometimes identity things that are coming up. And how am I soothing that discomfort? Because there is discomfort. And so I've learned from a very young age, this is how I do it. And I just keep going back. So that if I were to start pointing at like some very consistent themes, it was, how do I navigate discomfort? How do I navigate identity as a man? Like in all these things, oftentimes guys are so hard on themselves. It's like, Joe down the street is doing so well and I'm not doing as well. And shouldn't I be better? Or I messed up as a father. I messed up as a husband last night. I lost my temper maybe, or whatever these things are. All of it. And us not expecting perfection all the time. And maybe us being okay with being fallible. Yes, we should be working on ourselves and we want to be the best husbands and fathers that we can be. Yes. But the enemy uses all that stuff, amplify discomfort, bring us back to where we know how to soothe and just kind of rinse and repeat. That's, if I were to say, one of the brushes that I'd paint there.
Yeah. Bryan, it's interesting that yesterday, the day before we recorded this, I was in a men's Facebook group and I literally just posted this question. I was like, hey, why do you feel like men struggle with lust and pornography? And I kid you not, there's like over 100 comments on it. I was like, whoa, was not expecting that, first and foremost, right? But like about a half of them was somewhere around that line where you just said this lie of like, oh, it's because I'm not married, or I don't have someone, or now I'm divorced, so I don't have someone to be able to have these sexual intimacy encounters or to be able to release. And I'm like, in my mind, I was like, well, Jesus didn't have anyone and he was able to do it.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
there's a lot of single men that I know who are able to conquer it, but it's this lie that we believe. So I like how you are seeing these lies as themes of like, no, 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 that's a lie from the enemy. Let's get rid of that. But there's also the second one that I thought is you this whole time you didn't mention anything about like big traumatic abuse or traumatic encounters. You're like talking to the normal guy who's like, you know what?
Mm.
I sense some purpose and pleasure from this situation, and I want to relieve myself, or I want to find some dopamine hit. And it's like the normal guy who's constantly struggling and now is trying to find a way out.
Yeah, amen. And just as you just mentioned, the word trauma there, if it's okay, because I
Yeah.
know that we're really going here is like where therapy falls short. And part of the process for us, I can't speak to others and how they do it, but for us is oftentimes use a boiling pot analogy.
Yeah.
And we think about the boiling pot on the stove, and it starts to boil over. The lid's on, and here it goes. Well, we can quickly fix that. We can pull that lid off and blow on it or whatever, right? That's quick fix. There it is, kind of thing, right? And that represents like maybe some of the tools and these kinds of things you'll see, like softwares and these kinds of great. These can be helpful, sure. But I think the bigger question is, what is that flame underneath? Like, how do we turn that down? How do we turn the heat down on the pot, right? So that it's not boiling over. And those are things like if there is trauma history and those kinds of things. And that's where in our program, like we will be straight with men after because we screen for all this kinds of stuff. And it's like, hey, listen, if there actually is, a trauma history, maybe there was some kind of sexual abuse as a kid and these kinds of things, and it's kind of unresolved. It might be what we do with you around the pornography piece, yes, but it also might be actually working with a trauma therapist specifically for that piece. So in conjunction with what we do. So I think therapy does have its place in many instances. Like to this, for instance, I'm a big believer in specialization. So we specialize in helping men break free from pornography. Yes, there are people out there who are better at helping men resolve trauma. And so if that is something that is part of that flame underneath, therapy might work with this. But I think on its own, that's kind of my thesis, is that it's not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great question. Like when you mentioned trauma, just brought it to my mind.
No, no, that's good.
Yeah. If there is something that you need specialized help with, then you should get that. And that
Yeah.
should also be part of the healing process, because it's very
Yeah.
difficult.
Brian, I know here in the United States, one of the limits to therapy is integrating your faith and counseling someone, right? Like being able to talk about Jesus freely, especially if you're dealing with unbelievers and different things like that. How have you navigated that in your therapy? And also, maybe that's why you moved towards a coaching model, because now you're freed up to do whatever you want.
Yeah, great. So when I was doing therapy and running my practice, it was well known that I was a Christian guy, and
Yeah.
it would be part of my copy on the website and those kinds of things too. So I would have people come in, and I worked with many, like mostly Christians, because I was getting a lot of people from pastors and those kinds of things. People come to their pastor and like they're great at leading their flock spiritually and things, but probably not equipped for this. And so they were sending people. So a lot of Christians come, but with a non-Christian, it looks different, because you can't, in the therapy world, heaven help you if you try to Christianize anybody. That's just fact. Well, in Canada anyways. Like if you're sitting there and go like, oh, well, maybe you need to pray more, you could get in some big trouble really quickly with that. And so if someone comes in, and that's part of my intake process, is, oh yeah, do you follow any kind of specific faith? And if the answer is no, we kind of don't go there. And to be honest, it was another one of the ways, I think, a little bit handcuffing in that, because I believe that there are three big components of this. There's a biological piece. We think about the neural pathways in the brain, like those kinds of things. We think about physiology when it comes to this. It's very excitatory on a physiological level, of course. There's a psychological piece. Like, where is this rooted? What are the stories that are operating? What keeps bringing me back there, right? On a psychological. And then there's a spiritual aspect to this. Like, this is war, as we've been talking about, right? We have an enemy. And if you're missing one of those legs, it's like having a table. missing that leg, and it's just not going to be sturdy. So it's more difficult working with men where you can't go there, where it's like, yeah, then you're just really stuck to biological, psychological, and it's much harder, which is why when I stepped out into the coaching world, I said, okay, we're going to specifically work with married Christian men, because this is a holistic program, and this is what I think is needed holistically. I've had actually people reach out to me and ask me to be on their podcast in the past, and they've said to me, hey, would you mind like just not talking about that Christian stuff or whatever? I'm like, I'm not coming. Sorry. Like I'm just
Yeah.
like it's just such a big part of what we do. Like I don't know how I'd leave that out. Hey, while
Yeah.
you're yeah, it sounds silly, but like, hey, while you're a bag of meat walking around with nothing else, like here's the thing. Like it's just I don't know how to speak like that. And so yeah, so I've
No,
not
no.
worked.
I mean, but that's huge, and I think that's why I wanted to bring it up because I love that three component piece, right? You got biological, psychological, and spiritual,
Yeah.
right? And if you miss one of those, you're always going to be falling.
Yeah.
And I found, right, like there are sometimes some Christian counselors, they all they do is focus on spiritual, right? And it's like
Mm.
that'll answer everything. But like, no, there might be some trauma there or biological. Like
Yeah.
there are things that people deal with. I'll give you a great example. I so when I was 19, I got my thyroid removed, and that controls your. For those who don't know this controls your metabolism. It controls some other chemicals. But one of the side effects is if I'm not careful, and I'm not like I haven't optimized my thyroid intake, I can start to get into these like depressive moods. And
Mm.
like, when you are feel depressed, sometimes you feel lonely. And if you feel lonely, then all of a sudden you are more easily accessible to temptation, right? And that temptation for lust. And I have found many times in my life, I'm like, I just could backtrack and look, I'm like, oh my gosh, right now I feel really depressed. I have no idea why, right? Like it was just like random. And then I
Yeah.
just like asked myself, I'm like, have I been taking my supplements and medication? And it's like, oh, I missed it a few days. Like it just kicks in and I realize, okay, this is just biological. I need my friends to keep me accountable to just press through this. And then once I've done it, I'm like, I'm good to go. I'm back in shape. That's not always the case. There are some cases it is spiritual, right? Like there is,
Mhm.
like it says in scriptures, like the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, right? Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's psychological, right? Like pain come through this. I say all that to ask you, Bryan, how do you help men to determine out of those three legs, which one is the most predominant area where they are struggling with?
Yeah, and that's in kind of in our program. I don't want to, maybe we'll get into that later exactly what we do, but part of it is one-on-one time with a certified addictions recovery coach, and that's part of tailoring this to what everybody needs. Like, my goodness, I wish I could just release a bunch of videos and that be enough for people, but it's not. So us meeting with people and actually talking about their experience and getting some of their history, so that'll be part of the kind of the intake process, and we'll put it that way, where it's like, hey, what is your, are there any kind of mood disorders, anxiety, depression, like those kinds of things? How are you managing those right now? And if you are on medications, okay, that's on the radar. How's that going? Make sure you never miss those kinds of things. And so we tailor it to each person. So if a guy's like, sometimes I do feel some depressive symptoms, then we're battle planning. So I use a war analogy a lot, as you'll notice. So, hey, okay, what are we going to do when that battlefield presents itself? When there's a hill to be taken here, like, how are we going to take it? And so making those plans, or if we run into somebody where it's, I was very faithful when I was younger, man, my connection with God is just really depleted, almost to zero these days. Okay, well, then that's where we go. We talk about that. We're like, okay, what would that look like for you to increase that? Like, what lands for you? Is it devotionals in the morning? Is it church on Sundays? Is it like what feeds you? And if you don't know, let's try some things and let's taste some things and let's see where God connects with you and those kinds of things. I guess the long answer is, we tailor it to each person. And so like, and we do those kinds of screenings and we ask those kinds of questions because we want to have a really good lay of the land, before we plot our course through this thing, you know. So
Got it.
everyone gets that unique plan, I guess you'd
Tailored
say.
process. So walk us through a little bit of like if someone were to come to you and say, "Hey, I need help in I'm struggling with pornography." What's kind of like your process and how does your program work?
Yeah. Yeah. So we would have an initial, like just right from initial meeting. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So we'd have an initial meeting with that person and we'd screen for fit for starters. So, married Christian man, so married or in a very serious relationship, Christian guy. Okay. Then, good. We would, if big trauma comes up in that first conversation, we would talk about the possibility of, hey, listen, we will help you find, and I'm involved in that. If someone comes in, we'll help you find a therapist. I come from that world, so I know what to look for. So I will help you find somebody maybe you're in your community to help with the trauma piece. We do, this other piece. I think it's both. So we'll go through that. And then when a man comes in, he decides, and this is the way I'll put it when it comes to the war analogies, decides to draw that line in the sand and look that enemy in the eye and go like, I'm done, and then comes into this thing. Lots of different kind of components. So overarching that, that biological, psychological, spiritual, yes, but the actual nuts and bolts, if it's okay. I do. So like number one, when you come in, immediately you have access to what I've called our battle tested roadmap. We're calling it the porn-free marriage system. Okay. So this roadmap is a series of videos, and it's psychoeducational stuff. Like week number one, for instance, I'll teach you about the biological brain, how the neurochemical dopamine works, how your brain is working against you on a physiological level. Like those kinds of things are there. Week one, we talk about the spiritual aspect. As I mentioned many times, this is war. He's the general. Like, what are we doing every day, to connect with command? Like those kinds of things. So there's a at the end of each week of this video set, there are marching orders. Again, back to this war thing. You will know, the man will know exactly what to do every single day of this journey, because men know what they don't want to do, right? That's easy. Okay. But what do I do? Okay. I don't want to keep hurting my wife. I don't want to keep going this way. What do I do? Here's exactly what you're going to do. And after watching the video, they'll make sense what I'm asking you to do. Okay. So marching orders, those kinds of things. The second thing, in our program, you get one-on-one time with a pornography recovery specialist, again, specifically trained for this. That's our opportunity, as I was saying earlier, to tailor this thing to your specific needs. Because if it was just as easy as releasing videos, trust me, brother, I would have done that. And I don't know, bounced, I guess, like sat on a beach or whatever, right? But we tailor this to each man, so you get some one-on-one time with a specialized coach. It's a 6-month program that we offer, and then there's continuation after that. But for the first 3 months, we want that man to get really good traction immediately, right out of the gate. We want to get him moving. We're going to check him for the first 3 months. We're going to check in every single day with him to make sure that things are going well. It's very high touch, very high support. We want to get that movement right away. So we check in every day for the first 3 months. And if there's something going on, we get in there with you. Like, hey, there is this struggle I'm having today, then we'll get in with you and we'll coach you through it. As I often say, gone are the days of the, see you next week in the therapy world. Like that's all done now. We're going to bug you every single day for that first 3 months to make sure that you're on point. It's a 6-month program in total. Every week for that 6 months, we have group meetings. So lots of different group times available. There's way too many guys to come in on one call.
Yeah.
So you come to a meeting, another opportunity to check in, be with community, be with your platoon, other fellow married Christian men fighting the same enemy together. Iron sharpens iron. Come into a group, we check in with you again. We do some recovery reflection question each week for sharing among the men. And then we battle plan in group. We're like, hey, looking forward to the next week before we meet again. What's coming up? Anything on the radar this week? We have lots of guys travel for work and things. And, I remember one man specifically, he's like, yeah, Tuesday night, I'm in a hotel. Right. Yeah. And that can be hard for me in that hotel as I'm by myself. And then this wonderful group, this is where community is so important. These guys, brother, what do you need Tuesday night? Like, can we phone you? Can we text you? How do we help you win on Tuesday when you're alone? So it's this beautiful thing. And then, the last piece is we have this private WhatsApp community for like in the moment support. So as I was saying earlier, guys, even today, we have guys reaching out in there and there's always someone around, on this WhatsApp. So if you need support, someone's there. You don't have to wait for a meeting. You don't have to wait for anything. So that's kind of the experience of a guy coming in, just to kind of run through it really quick.
Yeah. It seems like for the first 3 months, there's a lot of high touch, which is on purpose because that's where people struggle. They feel alone. They feel very shameful about this. And they're just like, the enemy loves to isolate someone. And you're like combating those things. I'm curious, Bryan, as you've been doing this now for a while and working with men, when you are building that battle plan for them, have you seen a common theme of where they fall typically, so that like the listeners who are listening to this could be like, hey, I know you might not be able to work with Bryan right now, but there's this one thing that is common. Here's something I can help you with.
common when I think, again, so a lot of nuances, but try to
Sure.
grab
Yeah.
kind of the most common one I can think of right now might be, I think, discouragement and lack of hope. I
Hmm.
think that I think the enemy, well, I don't think, I know. The enemy does this very well, where, because he's done this for a long time, he knows how to do, like, remember, what's his goal? His goal is to separate husband and wife, because if he can do that, the family will fall.
Yeah.
And as I often say, pornography, this is his sharpest sword. He wants you to think that this is impossible. He wants to highlight, how many times have you tried to stop now and you haven't been up? Like, you're never going to get this right. You may as well, like in those times of weakness, sorry, or maybe temptation coming up, you may as well go for it, right? Because listen, you've tried all these times, like it's hopeless. Your wife right now is so angry at you, anyways. Like, you're never going to be able to do this. So I think him dashing that hope and really discouraging men is the biggest thing that I find, and that's where, again, the community piece. It's like, guys, here how I feel, like let's, and I think the way around that, or maybe to help with that, is we need to name it. We need to shine light. The enemy hates his own name.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm under attack right now. This is what's happening. I understand these are coming in through my thoughts and these kinds of things. I'm feeling discouraged and hopelessness. Like, we're at war. I'm right now. I'm under attack. And I need to, connecting with somebody to share this burden and to have someone speak into that, I think is huge. So I think discouragement, hopelessness, because guys feel terrible that their wives are hurting. Because, on the wife side of things, common themes, am I, there's a, okay, commonly on her side, if it's okay, there's a roller coaster of emotions that comes when there's discovery in the marriage of this stuff, where some days she might feel kind of okay, and other days there might be a lot of anger and she may not even want to see your face. Like, here we go. The enemy uses that for a man and goes like, look at what a piece of, insert, word, look what a piece of crap you are here, and look what you've done. Like, this woman who you've promised to protect and all these, and maybe you're, again, 99% of your life might be on point, right? And there's this piece that's just so heavy and so deep, but the enemy uses that to beat you down, and to send you into that shame and to send you into that discouragement. So if there was one thing to put my thumb on, it would be that, like, have hope. Like, remember who we have in this
Hmm.
war. We have the nuclear bomb, however you want to put this, right? Like,
Yeah.
the game stopper, you know? And so we just need to invite him in. Okay. And I don't mean to hop on a pedestal or whatever, but we need to invite him into this and remember who we have on our side and who's with us. We can do all things through him. Just sometimes we don't think we're worthy enough in these kinds of things. And we've all, I think, experienced that in some way or another, right? Like, Lord, like, I'd love to come to you right now, but what do you think of me, or whatever I feel, however you feel. And there he is. There's the enemy. Yeah, that's right. Right. He doesn't want to talk to you right now. Right. We have this idea that if we're acting out to this stuff or whatever, that, I'm going to put God in the corner for a minute. He doesn't see this stuff. He knows everything. He knows everything. So invite him into this. Like, let's facing toward, and this is war, and he's the general, and he's what we need.
Yeah. Bryan, I love that analogy, right? Because we sometimes forget that we are in a spiritual warfare. And I think, especially in our Western context, right? It we are so materialistic, and it's all about navel gazing and self indulgence that we actually forget, like, spiritual warfare is real, and the enemy loves to attack us in this area. And just reminding ourselves, like, no, Christ is King. He should be Lord of our lives, and we should be asking Him every day, God, how can I be more connected to you? How do I fight this battle? And then how do I be more present and purposeful with my wife and my kids and just the people around me? So, Bryan, this is huge. I think for men who are listening to this, I'd encourage you, if what Bryan is saying is resonating with you and you need that kind of high touch accountability and structure, man, reach out to Bryan. And Bryan, as we wrap up here, I am curious, what if someone is interested in learning more about what you're doing and how you're doing it, what's the best way they could get in contact with you?
Yeah, thanks. The best way would be to visit renewedhopecoaching.com. There's a video that goes a little bit more into the program that we run. Lots of testimonials. We've had hundreds of men through this thing now. So we've got a lot of testimonials there. That would be first step. And if you feel like it's a fit, then reach out and let's have a conversation about whether or not, this would be a fit for you. And yeah, that would be the best way to get hold of us.
Awesome. Bryan, thank you so much for breaking out of the mold. When you and I first talked and you were like, yeah, I used to do therapy and now I'm in coaching, I was really intrigued because I was like, ooh, I'm like, there's so many people who want to go into therapy right now because they want to help. But what you realize is like, hey, the system is broken. And if
Mm.
we want to help people, let's not be stuck in the system. Let's do what's right. And I love that about you. And you've been so humble about it too. You're just like, man, even before this call, you and I were sharing ideas of how do we help more men, be break free from this. So Bryan, I appreciate you so much, man. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I won't hold it against you that you're Canadian. So,
Thanks, brother.
but ultimately, man, I'm excited for what the Lord is doing, man, and how many men you've gotten to help and will continue to help. So
Yeah.
again, for those of you who are listening, I'd encourage you check out the show notes, right? Renewed Hope. What was it again? Sorry, what was
Yeah,
it?
no worries. Yeah, renewedhopecoaching.com.
renewedhopecoaching.com. Go check it out. Go reach out to Bryan because I think that if you truly want transformation and your life to start changing, you need that support system and you need those three pillars to really be intact. So go reach out to him. And for those of you who are still listening, thank you so much for being a part of this. And hopefully you got some great nuggets from Bryan. And as always, I always want to remind you, kill shame, stand strong, and be on mission. Hope you guys have a great day and God bless.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Remember, killing shame isn't just about breaking free from the past. It's about walking boldly into the future God has for you.